In Traverse City, Michigan, a 62-year-old widow was about to defy her family's expectations. What started as a new job took a shocking turn when she fell for her children's boss. Olivia Williams wasn't your typical office manager. For decades, she had sacrificed her own happiness for family, known for putting everyone else first. When she discovered unexpected love with James Mitchell, she had no idea she was walking into a family war. Olivia made a choice that would shatter everything. What began as professional respect became forbidden romance. Her family would never forgive what happened next. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn morning mist clung to Grand Traverse Bay like a whispered promise, its gray tendrils slowly lifting to reveal the crystalline waters that had drawn settlers to this corner of Michigan over a century ago. Olivia Williams sat in her modest sedan, outside the low-slung building that housed Mitchell Construction, her hands steady on the steering wheel despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. The company's sign, weathered but sturdy, proclaimed Mitchell Construction building dreams since 1998, in faded blue letters against white aluminum siding. 2 years. 2 years since Richard's funeral, since the last handful of earth had been scattered over his casket, since she'd stood in their empty house wondering what came next. The intervening months had blurred together, sorting through his belongings, selling the hardware store, existing rather than living. But today felt different. Today felt like the first step towards something new, though she couldn't quite name what that something might be. "You can do this," she murmured to herself, the words barely audible over the distant cry of gulls wheeling above the bay. At 62, she was starting over in a way she'd never imagined. The woman who had spent 35 years managing the books for Williams Hardware, who had raised 3 children and buried a husband, was now the new office manager for a construction company where she knew no one and nothing. The building's front door opened with a creak that spoke of honest wear rather than neglect. Inside, the scent of sawdust and coffee mingled with the sharper smell of blueprints and copy machine toner. The reception area was functional but chaotic. Filing cabinets overflowing with papers, a desk buried under invoices and estimates, and a coffee pot that had seen better decades. "You must be Olivia." The voice came from a woman in her 40s, harried but kind, with paint-stained fingers and tired eyes. "I'm Linda, the secretary." "Well, I was the secretary, now I guess I'm training my replacement." She gestured at the organized chaos around them. "Welcome to Mitchell Construction, where we build great structures but can't seem to organize a filing system." Olivia smiled, the expression feeling rusty but genuine. "I've seen worse." It was a small lie. She'd rarely seen an office in such disarray, but she recognized the shame in Linda's voice. "Sometimes the best places to work are the ones that actually need you." Linda's relief was palpable. "James, Mr. Mitchell, he's been worried about finding someone who could handle all this. He's out on a job site right now, but he'll be back around 10. She paused, studying Olivia with curious eyes. "He wasn't sure about hiring someone so experienced. Thought you might be overqualified." The word hung in the air like a euphemism. Experienced. Overqualified. Too old, in other words. Olivia had heard it before, in the subtle rejections from other potential employers, in the careful way people spoke around her lately. But she'd also heard something else in Linda's tone, respect, maybe even a little awe. "Experience is just another word for having made enough mistakes to know better," Olivia replied, settling her purse on the less cluttered corner of the desk. "Where should I start?" The next 2 hours passed in a blur of focused activity. Olivia moved through the office like a surgeon, diagnosing problems and implementing solutions with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent decades making sense of chaos. The filing system was her first victim. Invoices from 2019 mixed with current permits. Employee records scattered across 3 different drawers. She created order from disorder, her hands moving with practiced precision. Holy hell! The voice was deep, surprised, and decidedly male. Olivia looked up from the filing cabinet she'd been reorganizing to find a man standing in the doorway, work boots dusty, hard hat tucked under his arm. James Mitchell, she assumed, though he was younger than she'd expected, maybe 58, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of tan that came from actual work rather than leisure. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, straightening, "I'm Olivia Williams." He stepped into the office, his gaze sweeping over the transformed space. "James. And I think you've just performed a miracle." His voice carried the slight roughness of someone who spent his days calling instructions over power tools. But there was something else there. Intelligence, maybe even surprise. "Linda said you were good, but this is just the beginning," Olivia finished, allowing herself a small smile. "Your bookkeeping system is about 15 years behind best practices, and your billing cycle is costing you money. But those are fixable problems." James set his hard hat on the now organized desk and really looked at her for the first time. Olivia felt his assessment. Not unkind, but thorough. She'd dressed carefully that morning, choosing her best navy blazer and the pearls Richard had given her for their 20th anniversary. Professional but not flashy. Competent but not threatening. "You know," James said slowly, "when the temp agency sent your resume, I wasn't sure. Thought maybe you were looking for something to fill time, not somewhere to make a difference." "I'm not looking to fill time," Olivia replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm looking to be useful." "There's a difference." Something shifted in James's expression, a recognition perhaps of someone who understood the need to matter. "Well then, let's talk about what useful looks like around here." He gestured toward the small conference room visible through the open door. "Coffee?" As they settled at the scarred wooden table, Olivia pulled out a small notebook where she'd been jotting observations. "Your biggest immediate problem is cash flow. You're not billing fast enough, and you're not following up on overdue accounts. I found invoices from 6 months ago that were never sent." James leaned back in his chair, studying her with new interest. "You figured that out in 2 hours?" 35 years of running a business teaches you to spot the warning signs," Olivia said. "The question is whether you want someone to just process paperwork, or someone to help you run a more profitable operation. And you think you can do that?" For the first time in months, Olivia felt something stir in her chest. Not just confidence, but excitement. "I know I can. The question is whether you're willing to let me try." James was quiet for a long moment, his coffee growing cold as he considered her words. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Olivia Williams, show me what you've got." The rest of the morning flew by in a whirlwind of explanations and demonstrations. Olivia walked James through her preliminary assessment, pointing out inefficiencies and suggesting improvements with the calm authority of someone who had spent decades solving exactly these kinds of problems. She showed him how the scattered billing system was costing him money, how the disorganized filing was wasting time, how simple changes could streamline operations. "There's a billing dispute with the Henderson project," she mentioned, pulling out a thick folder. "Looks like it's been going on for months. The client is claiming work wasn't completed to specifications, but your foreman's notes show otherwise. The problem is, no one's been tracking the correspondence properly." James grimaced. "That's been a nightmare. We've been going back and forth with them for 4 months. I was starting to think we'd have to write it off." "Not necessarily." Olivia spread out the papers, her fingers moving through the documents with practiced ease. "Look here. They approved the change order in writing, but it was filed under the wrong project number. And here's the completion certificate, signed by their own inspector. The problem isn't the work, it's the documentation." She spent the next hour reconstructing the paper trail, creating a clear narrative of what had actually happened versus what the client was claiming. When she finished, James was staring at her with something approaching amazement. "You just saved us $12,000, he said quietly. "I just did my job," Olivia replied, but she couldn't keep the satisfaction out of her voice. For the first time in years, she felt truly useful, truly valued. Not as someone's wife or mother, but as herself, as a woman with skills and intelligence and something to offer. The afternoon brought a steady stream of employees stopping by to meet the new office manager. There was Tom, the foreman she'd heard about, a solid-looking man in his 30s who nodded politely but seemed distracted. Maria, the receptionist who worked part-time, smiled warmly, and mentioned she'd heard good things about Olivia's organizational skills. Each interaction was brief but cordial, the kind of professional courtesy that spoke of a workplace where people generally got along. As the day wound toward its close, Olivia found herself alone in the office with James, who had returned from another job site visit. The late afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the now orderly space. "You know," James said, perching on the edge of the desk, "I have to admit, I was skeptical about hiring someone with your background. Thought you might be bored, or that you'd expect things to be different." "Different how?" Olivia asked, though she suspected she knew. "More formal, I guess. More corporate. We're not exactly a Fortune 500 company here." Olivia smiled. A real smile this time, not the careful professional expression she'd been wearing all day. "I've spent my whole life in small businesses, James. I know the difference between corporate efficiency and family business values. You can have both." "Family business values?" he repeated thoughtfully. "I like that. Sometimes I worry we're too informal, too. Personal." "Personal isn't bad," Olivia said. "Personal means people care about what they're doing, about each other. You just need systems to support that caring, not replace it." James was quiet for a moment, and Olivia sensed he was seeing her differently now, not just as a competent employee, but as someone who understood what he was trying to build. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. "Listen," he said finally, "I know you just started today, but I'm curious about your thoughts on some of the bigger picture stuff. Would you be interested in grabbing coffee sometime this week? I'd like to pick your brain about long-term planning, maybe get your perspective on where we could improve." The invitation hung in the air between them, professional but tinged with something else, a recognition of shared understanding, maybe even the beginning of respect. Olivia felt her heart speed up slightly, though she told herself it was just the satisfaction of being valued for her expertise. "I'd like that," she said. "I think there's a lot of potential here." As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, Olivia caught sight of her reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, more confident, more engaged, more alive. It had been a long time since she'd felt this sense of purpose, this feeling that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The drive home took her along the shoreline, where the setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and crimson. Olivia rolled down her window, breathing in the crisp autumn air, feeling something she hadn't experienced in years: anticipation for tomorrow. She thought about James's invitation, about the potential she'd glimpsed in his struggling but honest business, about the satisfaction of solving problems and making a difference. For the first time since Richard's death, she wasn't just surviving, she was looking forward to something. The future, which had seemed so uncertain that morning, now held the promise of purpose and possibility. Whatever came next, Olivia Williams was ready to face it with the quiet confidence of a woman who had finally remembered her own worth. James's invitation for coffee lingered in Olivia's mind through the weekend, a small flame of anticipation that surprised her with its warmth. She found herself checking her reflection more often, considering which blouse might be appropriate for a business discussion that felt like something more. The careful dance of professional boundaries had never seemed so complex. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made Traverse City feel like a postcard. Olivia arrived at the office early, as had become her habit, savoring the quiet moments before the construction crews arrived with their boots and voices, and the comfortable chaos of a working day. She'd transformed the space in just a week, files organized, billing systems streamlined, the perpetual coffee stain on the front desk finally conquered. "You're making the rest of us look bad," came a voice from the doorway. James stood there with 2 steaming cups from the coffee shop down the street, his work clothes already bearing the day's first traces of sawdust. "I figured I owed you a proper cup after that instant stuff I served you last week." Olivia accepted the coffee with a smile that felt more natural than it had in months. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." The simple honesty in his voice made her look up. meeting his eyes for a moment longer than strictly professional. Besides, I had an ulterior motive. I was hoping we could talk about that long-term planning discussion. They settled into what had become their routine, the small conference room, papers spread between them, the comfortable focus of shared work. But today felt different. Today James asked questions that went beyond spreadsheets and profit margins. "What made you stay in the hardware business for so long?" he asked, leaning back in his chair with the easy posture of someone genuinely interested in the answer. Olivia considered the question, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "Security, I suppose. Richard needed help with the books, and I was good at it. The children were small, and it felt like the responsible choice." She paused, surprised by her own honesty. "I'm not sure I ever really chose it. It just happened. And now? Now I'm discovering I actually enjoy the challenge of making a business work better. There's something satisfying about solving problems, about making order from chaos." She gestured at the transformed office around them. "I never realized how much I missed feeling useful. Truly useful." James nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. After my divorce, I threw myself into building this company because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. The only thing I could control." It was the first personal revelation he'd shared, and Olivia felt the shift in their conversation like a door opening. "How long ago was that?" 15 years. Long enough that I should probably be over it by now." His laugh held a note of self-deprecation. "My ex-wife said I cared more about work than our marriage. The hell of it is, she was probably right." "Were you happy?" The question slipped out before Olivia could stop it. Too personal for a business meeting, but somehow necessary. James was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I thought I was. Looking back, I think I was just busy. There's a difference." He met her eyes across the table. "What about you? Were you happy?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Olivia found herself answering with a truth she'd barely admitted to herself. "I was content. For a long time, I thought that was enough." She paused, gathering courage. "I'm not sure I knew what happiness actually felt like until recently." "Recently?" "Since I started working again. Since I started feeling like myself instead of just someone's wife or mother." The admission felt dangerous and liberating at once. Their eyes met and held, a moment of recognition passing between them. Two people who had spent years in roles that fit like ill-tailored clothes, finally beginning to remember who they were underneath. The spell was broken by the sound of work boots on the front steps. Tom's voice carried through the thin walls as he called out a greeting to Maria, who had just arrived. The workday was beginning, and with it, the return to careful professional boundaries. But something had shifted. Over the following weeks, their coffee meetings became a regular occurrence. What started as discussions about cash flow and project management gradually evolved into something deeper. Conversations about dreams deferred, about the courage required to start over, about the unexpected ways life could surprise you when you thought you had it all figured out. Olivia found herself looking forward to these meetings with an anticipation that had nothing to do with business efficiency. She began to notice things about James that had nothing to do with his role as her employer. The way he listened with his whole attention, how his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the gentle way he spoke to the newer employees who were still learning their jobs. "You know," he said one afternoon as they reviewed the quarterly reports, "I used to think running a business was just about the bottom line. But watching you work with the crew, seeing how you remember everyone's names and ask about their families, you've reminded me that the human side matters too." Olivia felt warmth spread through her chest. "People work better when they feel valued. It's not complicated." "Maybe not, but it's not common either." James leaned forward, his voice dropping to something more intimate. "I want you to know how much I appreciate what you've brought to this place. Not just the organization and the systems, but the atmosphere. People smile more when they come in here now." "Including you," Olivia said softly, then felt her cheeks warm at the personal nature of the observation. "Especially me." His smile was gentle, acknowledging the truth they were both beginning to recognize. I haven't felt this optimistic about things in a long time. Their hands were resting on the conference table, inches apart. Olivia became acutely aware of the space between them, of the way the afternoon light caught the silver in James's hair, of the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. She wondered if he could hear it, if he felt the same electric awareness that seemed to charge the air between them. "Olivia," he said, her name carrying a weight it hadn't held before. "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but would you like to have dinner sometime? Not here, not about work. Just dinner." The invitation hung between them like a bridge she could choose to cross or leave unbuilt. Olivia thought about the careful life she'd constructed since Richard's death, the safe boundaries she'd drawn around herself, the expectations of a woman her age. Then she thought about the way James looked at her, not as a widow or a mother or someone to be managed, but as a woman worth knowing. "I'd like that," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "I'd like that very much." James's smile was like sunrise, warming and full of promise. "Friday night? There's a place overlooking the bay that I think you'd enjoy." As they made their plans, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, the thrill of possibility, the sweet anticipation of something new beginning. She was 62 years old, a widow, a mother of 3 grown children, and she was being asked on a date by a man who made her feel interesting and attractive and alive. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Over the next few days, Olivia found herself taking more care with her appearance, choosing clothes that flattered rather than simply covered, adding a touch of lipstick that had nothing to do with professional presentation. She caught herself humming while she worked, smiling at nothing in particular, feeling a lightness she'd almost forgotten was possible. "You look happy," Maria observed one afternoon, her tone curious but kind. "Different. Good different." Olivia paused in her filing, considering the observation. "I feel different. More like myself, if that makes sense." "Perfect sense," Maria said, with a knowing smile. "My grandmother always said that happiness looks different on everyone, but it always looks like coming home to yourself." Coming home to herself. Yes, that was exactly what it felt like. For the first time in years, Olivia Williams was remembering who she was when she wasn't defined by her relationships to other people. She was a woman capable of desire, worthy of attention, deserving of something that was hers alone. Friday evening couldn't come fast enough. As she stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the neckline of her favorite blue dress, Olivia felt a flutter of nervous excitement that belonged to a much younger woman. But why shouldn't she feel young? Why shouldn't she feel beautiful? James Mitchell thought she was worth taking to dinner, worth getting to know beyond the confines of their professional relationship. The restaurant James had chosen was perfect, intimate without being presumptuous, overlooking the bay where the setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and rose. They talked easily, the conversation flowing from childhood memories to travel dreams to the books they'd loved and the movies that had made them cry. "I always wanted to see Ireland," Olivia admitted over dessert, her voice wistful. Richard thought it was impractical, too expensive. He preferred familiar places, predictable vacations. "Ireland's beautiful," James said. "I went there a few years ago, after the divorce was final. Needed to do something just for me, you know? Something that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations." "What was it like?" "Green. Impossibly green, like someone had turned up the saturation on the whole world. And the people were so warm, so welcoming. They have this way of making you feel like you've been family for years, even when you've just met." He paused, studying her face in the candlelight. "I think you'd love it there." The suggestion hung in the air, not quite a promise, but a glimpse of possibilities neither of them was quite ready to name. They were two people discovering that it was possible to start over, to want things they'd thought were behind them, to believe in futures they'd never dared to imagine. As James walked her to her car, their footsteps echoing on the wooden pier, Olivia felt the pull of attraction she'd thought was buried with her youth. When he took her hand to help her navigate the uneven planks, she didn't pull away. When he turned to face her beside her car, she didn't step back. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. "I can't remember the last time I enjoyed myself so much." "Neither can I." His voice was gentle, his eyes searching her face. "Olivia, I hope you know how special you are. How much I've come to care about you." The word hung between them, careful and weighted with unspoken possibilities. Olivia felt her breath catch, her heart speed up in a way that had nothing to do with her age, and everything to do with the man standing close enough that she could smell his cologne. See the fine lines around his eyes. Feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "James," she whispered, his name carrying all the confusion and longing and hope she couldn't quite put into words. He reached up to touch her cheek, his fingers gentle against her skin. "Is this crazy? Two people our age, acting like teenagers?" "Maybe," she admitted, leaning into his touch. "But maybe crazy is exactly what I need right now." They stood there in the lamplight, two people who had lived full lives discovering that there were still chapters left to write, still chances to take, still reasons to believe in the possibility of love. The kiss, when it came, was gentle and searching, and full of questions neither of them was ready to answer. But as Olivia drove home through the quiet streets of Traverse City, her lips still tingling and her heart still racing, she knew that something fundamental had changed. She was no longer just Olivia Williams, the competent office manager, the dutiful widow, the devoted mother. She was a woman capable of inspiring desire, worthy of romance, deserving of a love story that was hers alone. The future, which had seemed so settled just a few weeks ago, now stretched ahead full of beautiful uncertainty. And for the first time in years, Olivia couldn't wait to discover what came next. The kiss lingered in Olivia's memory like a song she couldn't stop humming. All weekend, she found herself touching her lips absently, reliving the moment when James's mouth had met hers with such gentle certainty. She felt like a teenager again, analyzing every word, every gesture, every breath of their evening together. The woman who had spent 2 years moving through life like a sleepwalker was suddenly, vibrantly awake. Monday morning brought a different kind of nervousness. How did one navigate the delicate transition from professional colleague to what? She wasn't even sure what to call what was happening between them. Romance felt too bold a word, friendship too small. Whatever it was, it hummed in the air between them like electricity. James arrived at the office with the same coffee shop cups that had become their ritual, but today his smile held a warmth that made her stomach flutter. "Good morning," he said, and the simple greeting carried layers of meaning, acknowledgement of Friday night, anticipation of what might come next, the careful dance of two people stepping into uncharted territory. "Good morning," she replied, accepting the coffee with fingers that brushed his just long enough to send a spark up her arm. The touch was brief but intentional, a small confirmation that Friday night had been real, that this new awareness between them wasn't something she'd imagined. They maintained their professional facade through the morning staff meeting, discussing project timelines and budget allocations, with the same competence they'd always shown. But Olivia was hyper-aware of James's presence, the way he gestured when he spoke, how his attention seemed to find her across the room. When Tom asked about the quarterly reports, she felt James's eyes on her as she answered, and something warm unfurled in her chest at his obvious pride in her work. It wasn't until the afternoon, when the office had emptied for lunch, that they found themselves alone in the conference room, with the door closed and the weight of unspoken words between them. "About Friday night," James began, his voice careful but determined. "I hope I didn't." "You didn't," Olivia interrupted softly. "It was perfect." Relief flooded his features, followed by something that looked like wonder. "I've been thinking about you all weekend. About us. About what this means." "And what does it mean?" The question came out more breathless than she'd intended, but she couldn't bring herself to care about maintaining composure. Not when he was looking at her, like she was something precious and unexpected. "I don't know," he admitted, moving closer. "I know I'm your employer, and that complicates things. I know we're both old enough to know better than to rush into something without thinking it through. But I also know that I haven't felt this way about anyone in, maybe ever." Olivia's breath caught. "James, I keep thinking about that moment by your car, about how right it felt to kiss you. And I can't stop wondering what it would be like to do it again." The words hung between them, like a challenge and an invitation. Olivia felt her pulse quicken, her body responding to his nearness with an intensity that surprised her. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be desired, to feel the magnetic pull of genuine attraction. Richard had been comfortable, familiar, safe. This was something else entirely, dangerous and thrilling and alive. "We should be careful," she whispered, even as she stepped closer to him. "This could complicate everything." "I know." His hand came up to cup her cheek, the same gentle touch that had preceded their first kiss. "But I can't seem to care about complications right now." When their lips met this time, it was with less hesitation and more hunger. Olivia felt herself melting into the kiss, her hands fisting in his shirt as years of suppressed longing rose to the surface. She had forgotten what passion felt like, had convinced herself she was too old for such intensity. But James's mouth on hers, his hands threading through her hair, proved that desire had no expiration date. They broke apart breathless, foreheads touching as they struggled to regain composure. "This is insane," Olivia whispered, but she was smiling. "Completely," James agreed, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "And I don't want to stop." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. They were crossing a line, abandoning the safe boundaries of professional interaction for something infinitely more complex and rewarding. But as Olivia looked into James's eyes, she saw her own feelings reflected back, the wonder, the desire, the careful hope of two people who had thought such feelings were behind them. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We figure it out as we go," James replied, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "But carefully. Privately. I won't have anyone thinking less of you because of this." The protectiveness in his voice made something warm bloom in her chest. "And your employees? Tom works for you. Sarah's been handling your marketing contracts." "I know." James's jaw tightened slightly. "We'll need to be discreet. At least until we figure out what this is, where it's going." The need for secrecy added another layer of complexity to their situation, but also a certain thrill. They were embarking on something that belonged to them alone, a connection that existed outside the careful roles they played for the rest of the world. It felt simultaneously reckless and necessary. Over the following weeks, they developed a careful choreography of stolen moments and hidden glances. James would arrive early to share coffee and quiet conversation before the office filled with employees. They would find excuses to work late together, using project discussions as cover for deeper conversations about their lives, their dreams, their growing feelings for each other. "I never expected this," Olivia confessed one evening as they sat side by side reviewing budget projections, her shoulder brushing his as she leaned in to point out a discrepancy. The casual contact sent familiar sparks through her system. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "What? The budget analysis? Or the fact that you're slowly driving me out of my mind?" James's voice was teasing but edged with genuine desire. Olivia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Both, I suppose. After Richard died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd had my chance at love and marriage and everything that comes with it. And now?" She turned to face him fully, struck by the intensity in his eyes. "Now I'm wondering if maybe the best parts are still ahead of me." James's hand found hers on the table, their fingers intertwining with a naturalness that belied the newness of their relationship. "I hope so. Because I'm falling for you, Olivia Williams. Completely and irrevocably falling for you." The declaration took her breath away. Not because it was unexpected. She could see the truth of it in his eyes, feel it in the way he touched her, hear it in the tender way he spoke her name. But because it demanded a response, a matching vulnerability that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm 62 years old, James. I have grown children who think I should be content with grandchildren and gardening. I have a reputation in this town as Richard Williams's widow, the respectable woman who volunteers at church and never causes trouble. What we're doing, it changes everything." "Does it have to?" James asked gently. "Can't you be all of those things and also be a woman who deserves love and happiness?" The question struck at the heart of her internal struggle. For so long, she had defined herself through her relationships to others: wife, mother, caregiver. The idea of claiming something purely for herself, of prioritizing her own happiness over other people's expectations, felt both foreign and intoxicating. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I'm not sure I remember how to be selfish." "It's not selfish to want to be happy," James said firmly. "It's not selfish to want to be loved for who you are, not just for what you can do for other people." His words resonated in places she'd kept carefully protected, challenging assumptions she'd held about her own worth and desires. When had she started believing that wanting things for herself was somehow wrong? When had she accepted that her role was to serve others' needs while ignoring her own? "Show me," she whispered, the words carrying more weight than she'd intended. "Show me how to be selfish." James's eyes darkened with understanding and desire. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, Olivia leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her longing and fear and hope into the contact. This time, when his arms came around her, she didn't think about propriety or appropriateness or what anyone else might think. She thought only about the way he made her feel, desired, valued, alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. They began spending time together outside of work, careful to choose places where they were unlikely to encounter anyone who might know them. James took her to a small restaurant in the next town over, where they talked for hours over wine and candlelight. Olivia found herself sharing stories she'd never told anyone: her dreams of travel, her secret poetry writing, her regrets about chances not taken. "I always wanted to learn to dance," she confessed one evening as they walked along a secluded stretch of beach. "Ballroom dancing, the kind where you dress up and move like you're in an old movie." Richard thought it was silly. "It's not silly," James said, stopping to face her. "Dance with me. Here, now, there's no music." "There's always music if you listen for it." He held out his hand, his eyes warm with affection and mischief. "Come on. Show me what you've got." Laughing despite herself, Olivia took his hand and let him pull her into an impromptu waltz on the sand. They moved clumsily at first, both rusty and self-conscious, but gradually found a rhythm that was uniquely theirs. James hummed softly as they swayed together, and Olivia felt something inside her chest expand with pure joy. "See?" he murmured against her ear. "You're a natural." As they danced under the stars, waves lapping at their feet and the distant lights of Traverse City twinkling across the water, Olivia felt a profound shift in her understanding of herself. She wasn't just a widow marking time until the end of her story. She was a woman capable of inspiring love, deserving of romance, worthy of dreams and desires, and the kind of happiness she'd only read about in books. "I love you," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. James went still, his arms tightening around her. "Say that again." "I love you," she repeated, stronger this time, claiming the truth of it. "I love the way you make me feel like myself again. I love your kindness and your strength, and the way you see me as more than just what I can do for other people. I love you, James Mitchell, and I don't care if that's inconvenient or complicated or inappropriate for a woman my age." His kiss was fierce and tender and full of promise. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were bright with emotion. "I love you too," he said. "More than I thought possible, more than I knew I still could." They stood there holding each other as the waves whispered against the shore, two people who had found something precious and unexpected in the second act of their lives. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of possibility. There would be challenges, Olivia knew, questions about their age difference, about workplace relationships, about the reaction of her children and the community. But for this moment, under the vast Michigan sky, none of that mattered. What mattered was the way James looked at her like she was a miracle he'd never expected to find. What mattered was the way her heart sang when he said her name. What mattered was the recognition that love, real love, was possible at any age, in any circumstance, for anyone brave enough to reach for it. As they walked back to their cars, hands intertwined, Olivia felt the last of her careful defenses crumble. She was in love. Completely, helplessly, gloriously in love. And for the first time in her life, she was going to fight for that love, whatever the cost. The secret couldn't last forever, she knew. But for now, it was theirs alone. A beautiful, dangerous, transformative secret that was changing them both in ways they were only beginning to understand. The secret that had felt like a beautiful shared treasure was about to become a weapon turned against them. Tom Williams had always been an early riser, a trait inherited from his father and reinforced by years of construction work. On this particular Tuesday morning in November, he arrived at Mitchell Construction 40 minutes before his usual time, intending to review the blueprints for the Morrison project before the chaos of the workday began. The office was supposed to be empty. The lights were off in the main workspace, and Tom used his key to enter quietly, not wanting to disturb the peace of the early morning. He made his way toward the conference room where the project files were stored, his work boots silent on the carpet his mother had insisted on installing to make the place feel more professional. That's when he heard the voices, low, intimate, unmistakably personal in a way that made him freeze mid-step. Through the partially open conference room door, he could see two figures silhouetted against the window that faced the bay. His boss, James Mitchell, and his mother, Olivia Williams, standing closer together than any professional relationship would warrant. Tom's first instinct was to back away, to give them privacy and pretend he hadn't seen anything. But something about their posture, the way his mother's hand rested on James's chest, the tender way James was looking down at her, made him stay frozen in place, unable to process what he was witnessing. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," his mother was saying, her voice soft with an intimacy that made Tom's stomach clench. "About us. About the future." "And?" James's voice carried a warmth Tom had never heard directed at anyone, let alone his 62-year-old mother. "I think you're right. I think we should tell people soon. I'm tired of pretending this doesn't matter, that you don't matter." Olivia's voice grew stronger, more confident. "I want to be able to hold your hand without looking over my shoulder. I want to go to dinner without driving to the next town. I want to stop hiding what makes me happy." Tom watched in horrified fascination as James cupped his mother's face in his hands, the gesture achingly tender. "Are you sure? Once we tell people, there's no going back. Your children—" "My children want me to be happy," Olivia interrupted, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "They might be surprised at first, but they'll understand. And if they don't—" Olivia was quiet for a long moment, and Tom found himself holding his breath, waiting for her answer. "Then they'll have to accept that I'm still a woman with my own life to live, not just their mother." The conviction in her voice hit Tom like a physical blow. This wasn't some passing fancy or moment of weakness. This was his mother, talking about a future with his boss, talking about choosing this relationship over her family's approval if necessary. Before he could process what he was seeing, before he could retreat or announce his presence, James leaned down and kissed his mother. Not a polite peck on the cheek, not the careful kiss of new acquaintances, but the deep, passionate kiss of two people who had found something precious in each other. Tom's sharp intake of breath broke the morning quiet like a gunshot. Both figures in the conference room sprang apart, turning toward the sound with the guilty expressions of people caught in something they knew was wrong. "Tom." His mother's voice was breathless, her lipstick smeared, her hair mussed in a way that spoke of intimate embraces. We didn't expect." Clearly, the word came out harsher than Tom intended, loaded with shock and disapproval and a dozen emotions he couldn't begin to name. He stood there staring at them, his mother and his boss, two people he respected and trusted, who had apparently been carrying on some kind of affair right under his nose. James stepped forward, his posture protective as he moved slightly in front of Olivia. "Tom, I know this is unexpected." "Unexpected?" Tom's voice cracked like a teenager's. "My 62-year-old mother is making out with her boss in the office where I work, and you call it unexpected?" The crude description made Olivia flinch, and Tom felt a stab of guilt even as anger continued to surge through him. This was his mother, the woman who had bandaged his scraped knees and taught him to tie his shoes and driven him to every baseball game of his youth. She wasn't supposed to be, whatever this was. "Tom, please," Olivia said, stepping around James with the dignity that had always been her trademark. Let me explain. Explain what? That you're having some kind of midlife crisis? That you're so lonely you're willing to throw away your reputation for? He gestured helplessly at James, words failing him. For what? Olivia's voice sharpened, and Tom saw a flash of the steel he'd always known existed beneath her gentle exterior. For love? For happiness? For feeling like a woman instead of just a widow? The words hit him like slaps. Mom, you're 62 years old. You have grandchildren. You're supposed to be, I don't know, volunteering at church and taking up knitting, not this. Not falling in love? Olivia's voice was dangerously quiet now. Not being desired by a good man who treats me with respect and kindness? Not discovering that there might be more to my life than just memories of your father? Tom felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. The comfortable order of his world, his competent, predictable mother, his straightforward job, the clear lines between personal and professional, was crumbling around him. This is wrong, he said desperately. This is inappropriate. He's your boss. He's my boss. Do you have any idea how this looks? I know exactly how it looks, James said quietly, his voice carrying the authority that had made him a successful businessman. It looks like two adults who found something meaningful together, something worth the complications. Complications? Tom laughed bitterly. You think this is just complicated? You're dating the mother of two of your employees. You're taking advantage of a woman who's still grieving. I am not taking advantage of anyone. James's voice carried a warning now, the same tone he used when subcontractors tried to cut corners or employees crossed lines. Your mother is a grown woman, fully capable of making her own decisions about her life and her happiness. She's vulnerable, Tom shot back. She's been alone for 2 years, she's grateful for the job, and you're in a position of power over her. If you can't see how that's problematic, stop. Olivia's voice cut through their argument like a blade. Both men turned to look at her, and Tom was struck by how different she looked, not diminished by the confrontation, but somehow larger, more present. Stop talking about me like I'm not here, like I'm some helpless victim who can't think for herself. She moved to stand beside James, and Tom noticed how naturally they fit together, how James's hand came up to rest on her back in a gesture of support and solidarity. The observation made his stomach turn. Tom, she continued, her voice steady and sure, I understand this is shocking. I understand you need time to process it. But I will not stand here and listen to you describe my relationship as inappropriate, or my feelings as a phase. I love James. He loves me. We are both adults, and we have the right to choose happiness, even if that happiness doesn't fit your idea of what my life should look like. Your life should look like Mom, Tom exploded, all his confusion and fear pouring out in a rush of words. It should look like the woman who raised me and Sarah and Danny, who took care of Dad when he was sick, who volunteers at the church bake sale and remembers everyone's birthday. It shouldn't look like some teenager sneaking around with her boyfriend. The description was cruel and inaccurate, and Tom knew it the moment the words left his mouth. But the damage was done. He watched his mother's face pale, watched her confidence falter for just a moment before her chin came up in a gesture of defiance he recognized from every argument of his childhood. I see, she said quietly. So in your mind, being a good mother means giving up any chance of personal happiness. It means accepting that my role is to serve others' needs while denying my own. It means pretending that I died along with your father, that the woman I was before you children were born never existed. That's not what I meant, isn't it? Olivia's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. Because that's exactly what you're asking me to do. You're asking me to sacrifice my happiness to preserve your comfort with your image of who I should be. Tom felt like he was drowning, like everything he'd thought he understood about his life was being stripped away. I'm asking you to think about what this means for the family, for your reputation, for the business. What happens when Sarah finds out, when Danny finds out? What happens when the whole town knows that Olivia Williams is having an affair with her boss? It's not an affair, James said firmly. We're both single adults in a committed relationship. There's nothing sordid or shameful about what we have. Tell that to the church ladies, Tom snapped. Tell that to the guys on the crew. Tell that to your clients when they find out their contractor is sleeping with his office manager. The vulgar phrasing made Olivia recoil as if she'd been struck. Tom immediately regretted the words, but it was too late to take them back. The damage was spreading through the room like spilled poison. I think, Olivia said with careful precision, that this conversation has gone far enough. Tom, you're upset, and you're saying things you don't mean. I suggest you take some time to think about what you've learned today before you say anything else you'll regret. I regret plenty already, Tom muttered, but some of the fight had gone out of him. Looking at his mother, really looking at her, he could see the hurt his words had caused, the way she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. Tom, James said quietly, I know this is difficult, but I need you to understand something. I care about your mother more than I've cared about anyone in years. I would never do anything to hurt her or damage her reputation. What we have is real, and it's built on respect and genuine affection. And what about work? Tom asked, grasping for some kind of solid ground. How am I supposed to work for you now, knowing this? How am I supposed to look at you giving orders and not wonder if you're thinking about my mother? How am I supposed to maintain any kind of professional relationship when my personal life is all tangled up in it? It was a fair question, and Tom could see that both James and his mother recognized it. The complexity of the situation was staggering. Workplace relationships were complicated enough without adding family dynamics to the mix. We'll figure it out, James said finally. All of us. Together. Like adults. Will we? Tom's voice was heavy with doubt. Because I don't see how this ends well for anyone. I don't see how we get past this. We get past it, Olivia said firmly, by remembering that we love each other. That we're family. That your happiness matters to me just as much as mine should matter to you. The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and a plea. Tom looked at his mother, really looked at her, and saw something he'd been missing. She wasn't just his mother anymore. She was a woman who had found love in the second act of her life, who was glowing with a happiness he hadn't seen since before his father's illness. She was asking him to accept that she had needs and desires beyond her role as his parent. I need time, he said finally. I need to think about this. Of course, Olivia said gently. Take all the time you need. But Tom, I hope you'll remember that I've spent most of my adult life putting other people's needs first. I hope you'll think about whether it's fair to ask me to do that again. Tom nodded stiffly and turned to leave, then paused at the door. I have to tell Sarah and Danny. They have a right to know. I know, Olivia said quietly. I was hoping to tell them myself, but I understand if you feel you need to. Prepare them. The careful phrasing didn't fool anyone. They all knew that Tom's version of the story would be colored by his shock and disapproval, that he would present the news in the worst possible light. But there was no stopping it now. The secret was out, and the consequences would have to be faced. As Tom left the office, his mind reeling with everything he'd witnessed, he could hear his mother and James talking quietly behind him. Planning, probably. Strategizing about how to handle the fallout from his discovery. The thought made him feel sick and angry and strangely betrayed. By the time he reached his truck, Tom had already pulled out his phone. Sarah would be getting ready for work, but she'd want to know immediately. Danny might be harder to reach, buried in his graduate studies, but he'd have to be told too. The family meeting would be ugly. Tom could already picture Sarah's horrified reaction, her immediate assumption that their mother was being manipulated or taken advantage of. Danny would try to play peacemaker, but even he would struggle with the image of their proper, dignified mother carrying on with her boss like some kind of… Tom cut off that line of thinking. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't accurate. But, fair or not, accurate or not, it was how people would see it, how his siblings would see it, how the whole damn town would see it when word got out. And word would get out. In a town like Traverse City, secrets like this never stayed hidden for long. Their mother had chosen her path, And now they would all have to live with the consequences. As he drove through the quiet morning streets toward his own house, Tom found himself wondering when everything had gotten so complicated. When had his stable, predictable world become this maze of conflicting loyalties and impossible choices? When had his mother stopped being just his mother and become this complex woman with her own desires and agenda? The answer, he realized with a sinking heart, was probably the moment his father died, the moment Olivia Williams stopped being Richard's wife and became just herself, a woman with her own life to live and her own choices to make. The question now was whether her children would be able to accept the woman she was becoming, or whether they would destroy the family in their desperate attempt to preserve the memory of who she used to be. The Williams family home had always been a place of comfort. Warm hardwood floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps, family photos clustering on every surface, the lingering scent of Olivia's vanilla candles mixing with the ghost of Richard's pipe tobacco. But on this gray Saturday afternoon, the familiar space felt like a battlefield, waiting for the first shot to be fired. Olivia moved through her kitchen with mechanical precision, arranging cookies she'd stress-baked at 3 a.m, brewing coffee no one would drink, setting out her good china as if proper presentation could somehow civilize what was about to happen. Her hands were steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs with the erratic rhythm of a caged bird. Sarah arrived first, as Olivia had known she would. Her eldest daughter swept through the front door with the purposeful energy that had made her successful in marketing, her heels clicking on the hardwood like a countdown timer. She was perfectly put together despite the weekend, her blonde hair smoothed into its signature bob, her makeup flawless even though Olivia could see the tension crackling around her like electricity. "Mom." Sarah's voice was carefully controlled, the tone she used in hostile business meetings. She kissed Olivia's cheek with perfunctory affection, then stepped back to study her mother's face, as if looking for signs of mental illness or dementia, anything that might explain what Tom had told her. Tom arrived moments later with Michael, Sarah's husband, trailing behind with the resigned expression of a man who'd been conscripted into someone else's war. Tom's face was grim, his jaw set in the stubborn line that had appeared when he was 3 years old and had never entirely disappeared. He nodded at his mother without meeting her eyes, the distance between them feeling vast and cold. Danny was the last to arrive, bursting through the door with his perpetually disheveled hair and the distracted air of someone whose mind was usually half-focused on theoretical frameworks and research methodologies. But today his attention was laser-sharp, his gaze moving between his siblings and mother with the analytical intensity he usually reserved for psychological case studies. "Okay," Sarah said without preamble, settling into the living room like a prosecutor taking her position. "Tom told us some very disturbing things. I'm hoping there's been some kind of misunderstanding." Olivia took a breath, centering herself the way she had before every difficult conversation of her adult life. "There's no misunderstanding. James and I are in a relationship. A serious, committed relationship." The words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and disapproval that Olivia could see spreading across her children's faces. Sarah's carefully composed expression cracked, revealing the horror underneath. Tom's jaw tightened further, if that was possible. Only Danny seemed unsurprised, though his eyes were bright with concern. "A relationship," Sarah repeated, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Mom, you're 62 years old. James Mitchell is your boss. This is inappropriate on so many levels I don't even know where to start." "Start with the assumption that I'm still capable of making my own decisions about my personal life," Olivia replied, settling into her own chair with what she hoped looked like calm confidence. "I'm a widow, not a child. I have the right to seek companionship and happiness." "Companionship, yes," Sarah shot back. "But this isn't companionship. This is a workplace romance with a man who has power over you professionally. Do you have any idea how that looks? How it reflects on this family? How it reflects on the family?" Olivia felt her careful composure beginning to slip. "Sarah, this isn't about the family's reputation. This is about my life, my happiness, My choice to love someone who makes me feel alive again. Love? Tom's voice cracked on the word. Mom, you barely know him. You've worked for him for what, 3 months? 4? That's not love. That's infatuation. Or desperation. Or maybe it's the real thing, Danny interrupted quietly, speaking for the first time since he'd arrived. Maybe it's what love looks like when you're mature enough to recognize it quickly and brave enough to act on it. Sarah rounded on her youngest brother with fury. Don't you dare romanticize this, Danny. This is our mother we're talking about. Our mother, who's supposed to be setting an example for her grandchildren, who's supposed to have some dignity, some sense of propriety. Some sense of what? Olivia's voice cut through Sarah's tirade like a blade. Some sense that my job is to be a sexless, passionless guardian of other people's comfort? Some sense that loving your father meant I was never allowed to love anyone else? The mention of Richard brought a moment of shocked silence. In the 2 years since his death, they had all tiptoed around his memory, treating it like something too fragile to examine closely. But now Olivia had thrown his name into the middle of their conflict, and the implications hung heavy in the air. Dad's only been gone 2 years, Tom said finally, his voice rough with emotion. 2 years, Mom. How can you already be moving on like this? Moving on? Olivia laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tom, I mourned your father for 35 years while he was still alive. I mourned the man he was when we were young, the partnership we might have had, the conversations we stopped having somewhere along the way. I loved him, and I was faithful to him, and I took care of him until the day he died. But I will not spend the rest of my life mourning him when I have a chance to be happy with someone else. The brutal honesty of the statement hit her children like a physical blow. Sarah's face went white, Tom stepped back as if he'd been slapped, and even Danny looked shaken by his mother's stark assessment of her marriage. That's not. Dad loved you, Sarah whispered. He wasn't perfect, but he loved you. How can you say, he loved me the way he was capable of loving, Olivia said gently. But that doesn't mean I was happy, Sarah. That doesn't mean I was fulfilled. That doesn't mean I have to settle for contentment when I could have joy. Joy? Sarah's voice rose, finally cracking through her careful control. You call sneaking around with your boss joy? You call having an affair that could destroy his business and humiliate this family joy? It's not an affair, Olivia said firmly. We're both single adults. There's nothing illicit or shameful about what we have. There's everything shameful about it. Sarah was on her feet now, pacing with agitated energy. You're a 62-year-old grandmother carrying on with a man who could fire you tomorrow if he gets tired of you. You're risking your financial security, your reputation, our family's standing in this community. For what? For some fantasy about being young again? The accusation stung because it hit so close to fears Olivia had wrestled with herself. But she had faced those fears and chosen love anyway, and she wouldn't let her daughter's panic diminish that choice. I'm not trying to be young again, she said quietly. I'm trying to be happy now, at the age I am, with the life I have left. Is that really so terrible? It's reckless, Tom said. It's selfish. You're not thinking about anyone but yourself. For the first time in my adult life, yes, I'm thinking about myself first, Olivia admitted. And I'm not going to apologize for that. Michael, who had been silent through the entire confrontation, finally spoke up. Maybe we should all take a step back here. Mrs. Williams, I can see that this relationship makes you happy, but surely you can understand your children's concerns. The workplace dynamic, the potential for gossip, the effect on Tom's job. The effect on Tom's job? Olivia turned to her son with sharp attention. Is James treating you differently? Is he being unprofessional in any way? Tom shifted uncomfortably. No, but that's not the point. The point is that it's awkward. The point is that every time he gives me an order or evaluates my work, I'm going to wonder if it has anything to do with you. The point is that my professional relationship with my boss is now completely compromised. Only if you let it be, Olivia said. James is a good man and a fair employer. He's not going to let our relationship affect how he treats you professionally. You can't know that, Sarah interjected. You can't know what will happen when this relationship ends. And it will end, Mom. Men like James Mitchell don't marry women like you. They have affairs with them. The cruelty of the statement sucked the air out of the room. Olivia felt it like a physical blow. The implication that she was too old, too ordinary, too beneath James's station to be worthy of genuine love. Sarah seemed to realize she'd gone too far, but she didn't apologize, didn't take the words back. Women like me, Olivia repeated softly. What exactly does that mean, Sarah? Sarah's face flushed, but she pressed on. It means women who are vulnerable after losing their husbands. Women who are grateful for attention and don't ask too many questions about a man's intentions. Women who are old, Olivia finished. Women who should be satisfied with whatever scraps of affection they can get because they're past their expiration date for love. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Olivia stood, moving to the window that looked out over the garden Richard had planted, the one she'd maintained alone for 2 years. You think James is using me. You think I'm too foolish or desperate to recognize genuine feelings. You think that at my age, with my looks, with my circumstances, I should be grateful for any attention at all and not expect real love. Mom, Danny started, but Olivia held up a hand. Let me finish. She turned back to face her children, and they were struck by the dignity in her posture, the quiet strength that had carried her through decades of putting others first. You think I don't know what I look like? You think I don't know I'm not 25 anymore? That I have gray hair and lines around my eyes and a body that shows the years? You think I haven't looked in the mirror and wondered what a successful, attractive man like James could possibly see in me? The questions hung in the air, and her children squirmed under the weight of having their assumptions laid bare. But here's what you don't understand, Olivia continued. James sees me. Not the mother you need me to be, not the widow the community expects me to be, not the aging woman who should be invisible. He sees me. My intelligence, my humor, my capacity for love, my dreams and desires, and all the parts of myself I thought I'd lost forever. He makes me feel beautiful, not despite my age, but because of everything I've lived through to get here. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, but her voice remained steady. That's what love looks like at 62. It's not about physical perfection or social status or any of the things you think matter. It's about being truly seen and valued for who you are. And I'm sorry if that threatens your image of who I should be, but I will not give it up to make you more comfortable. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, the sound that had marked time in this house for as long as any of them could remember. Sarah was crying now too, though she was trying to hide it. Tom stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. Danny looked like he was wrestling with something he couldn't quite put into words. So what now? Sarah asked finally, her voice thick with tears and frustration. We're supposed to just accept this? We're supposed to smile and pretend everything's fine while you have your midlife crisis? It's not a midlife crisis, Olivia said wearily. It's my life. And yes, I hope you'll accept it. I hope you'll trust that I know my own heart and mind well enough to make good decisions about my future. And if we can't? The question came from Tom, delivered like a challenge. Olivia looked at each of her children in turn. Sarah with her tear-streaked makeup and defensive posture, Tom with his stubborn jaw and wounded eyes, Danny with his intellectual curiosity warring against his emotional distress. These were the people she loved most in the world, the ones whose approval she had spent her life seeking and maintaining. Then we'll have to find a way to live with that, she said quietly. Because I won't choose between loving James and loving you. I refuse to accept that those two things are mutually exclusive. But if push comes to shove? Sarah pressed. If it really comes down to a choice between him and us? Quote. The ultimatum hung in the air like a sword, sharp and gleaming and terrible in its implications. Olivia looked at her eldest daughter, seeing the fear beneath the anger, the desperation of someone watching their world shift in ways they couldn't control. I hope it never comes to that, Olivia said. But if it does, I hope you'll remember that I spent 35 years putting this family first. I hope you'll think about whether it's fair to ask me to do that again, when I've finally found something that's mine alone." The words were as close to a choice as any of them wanted to hear. Sarah's face crumpled completely, Tom's shoulders sagged with defeat, and Danny closed his eyes as if the weight of the family's fracturing was too much to bear. "I think," Michael said gently, speaking into the charged silence, "that everyone needs some time to process this. Maybe we should take a break, let emotions settle, and try to have another conversation when we're all feeling less raw." It was a reasonable suggestion, but they all knew that time wouldn't heal this particular wound. The fundamental divide had been exposed. Olivia's determination to claim her own happiness versus her children's need to preserve their image of who she should be. No amount of cooling off would bridge that gap. One by one, her children gathered their things and prepared to leave. Sarah paused at the door, her hand on the frame, looking back at her mother with something that might have been pity. "I hope he's worth it, Mom," she said quietly. "I hope he's worth losing your family over." "I hope I don't have to find out," Olivia replied. After they left, Olivia stood in her empty living room, surrounded by the remnants of their confrontation. Cold coffee in untouched cups, crumpled tissues, the lingering scent of anger and fear and love gone wrong. She felt simultaneously drained and strangely liberated, as if she'd finally stopped carrying a weight she hadn't realized was crushing her. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. How did it go? She stared at the simple question, trying to find words for the complexity of what had just happened. Finally, she typed back, "I chose you. I chose us. Now we have to live with the consequences." His response came immediately. "We'll face them together. I'm proud of you." Proud of her. For the first time in her life, someone was proud of her for choosing herself, for standing up for her own happiness, for refusing to sacrifice her future on the altar of other people's expectations. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows, and Olivia pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders. Winter was coming to Traverse City, and with it, the long season of choices and consequences, of family fractures that might never fully heal. But for the first time in her life, she would face that winter as herself, not as someone's wife or mother or the person others needed her to be, but as Olivia Williams, a woman who had chosen love and would fight to keep it, whatever the cost. The tension that had erupted in Olivia's living room didn't stay contained within the walls of her home. Like water finding cracks in a foundation, the family conflict seeped into every corner of their interconnected lives. And nowhere was this more apparent than at Mitchell Construction, where personal relationships and professional obligations collided with devastating force. Monday morning arrived gray and bitter, matching the mood that settled over the office like a suffocating blanket. Tom showed up 15 minutes late, his usual punctuality abandoned along with his customary easy demeanor. He moved through his duties with mechanical precision, avoiding eye contact with James and responding to direct questions with clipped, professional answers that carried the chill of barely controlled resentment. Olivia watched her son's transformation with growing anguish. The warm, straightforward man who had inherited his father's work ethic and her own gentle nature had been replaced by someone cold and distant, someone who looked at her with barely concealed disappointment every time their paths crossed in the office. "The Henderson project needs final approval on the electrical specifications," Tom announced during the morning meeting, his voice flat and businesslike. He placed the folder on the conference table without looking at James, without the casual respect that had always characterized their working relationship. "Any concerns with the contractor's timeline?" James asked, his own voice carefully neutral despite the obvious strain. "No, sir." The formality was pointed, a deliberate reminder of the power dynamics that Tom now viewed as corrupted by personal entanglements. "Everything's on schedule, assuming no complications arise." The subtext was clear to everyone in the room. Complications had already arisen, and they were sitting at the head of the table, trying to pretend that sleeping with an employee's mother hadn't fundamentally altered the workplace dynamic. Maria, the part-time receptionist, glanced nervously between Tom and James, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source. The other crew members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, picking up on the hostile undercurrents without knowing how to navigate them. After the meeting, Olivia found herself alone with the uncomfortable awareness that her presence was poisoning the professional atmosphere she had worked so hard to create. Every interaction felt fraught. Every casual conversation with James scrutinized for inappropriate intimacy. She began to question whether she should avoid him entirely during work hours, but that felt like surrendering to shame about a relationship she refused to be ashamed of. The situation deteriorated further when Sarah made her first offensive move. As the marketing consultant for several local businesses, she had cultivated relationships throughout Traverse City's business community, relationships she now weaponized with surgical precision. "I'm just concerned about the rumors," she told Betty Carlson over lunch at the country club, her voice pitched perfectly to convey reluctant worry rather than malicious gossip. Betty ran the largest accounting firm in town and handled the books for half the construction companies in the county. "You know how people talk, and with Mom working there, I just worry that it reflects poorly on everyone involved. The poison spread through the community like oil on water." By Wednesday, James was fielding uncomfortable questions from the Riverside Mall project manager, who had heard some things about Mitchell Construction's internal operations and wanted to ensure that personal relationships wouldn't affect the company's professionalism. "I'm sure it's nothing," the project manager said with the kind of smile that meant everything. "But you understand our position. We need to maintain certain standards for our contractors." James understood perfectly. He understood that Sarah Williams was using her network to undermine his business, that professional relationships he had spent years building were being poisoned by carefully planted suggestions about inappropriate workplace conduct. He understood that his love for Olivia was becoming a liability that could destroy everything he had worked to create. The breaking point came on Thursday afternoon when Gerald Morrison called to cancel the waterfront development project, a contract worth $200,000 and 6 months of steady work for his crew. "I'm sorry, James," Morrison said, though his voice carried no real regret. "The board has some concerns about the stability of your organization. Nothing personal, you understand. Just business." James hung up the phone and stared at it for a long moment, feeling the weight of consequences settling around him like falling debris. $200,000. 6 jobs for his crew members, including Tom. The momentum he had been building toward expansion, toward the kind of success that would secure his company's future, evaporating because he had fallen in love with his office manager. Olivia appeared in his doorway as if summoned by his distress, her face pale with concern. "James, what's wrong?" He looked at her, this woman who had brought order to his chaos, intelligence to his decision-making, love to his carefully guarded heart, and felt the crushing weight of impossible choices. How could he tell her that their relationship was costing him everything he had worked for? How could he not tell her? "The Morrison project," he said finally. "They're pulling out." Olivia's face went white. "Because of us? Because of rumors about us. Because your daughter has been very effective at raising questions about my professionalism, about whether my personal relationships affect my business judgment." The words hung between them like an accusation, though James hadn't meant them that way. Olivia sank into the chair across from his desk, her composure finally cracking under the weight of unintended consequences. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I should have been more careful. I should have insisted we keep things completely separate." "No." James's voice was firm, cutting through her self-recrimination. "You should never have to hide who you are or what makes you happy. The fault lies with people who think they have the right to judge how we live our lives." But even as he said the words, James could feel the trap closing around them. Love might be worth fighting for, but was it worth destroying the livelihoods of his employees? Was it worth watching everything he had built crumble because he couldn't keep his personal and professional lives separate? The office door opened without a knock, something that would have been unthinkable a week ago but now felt inevitable. Tom stood in the doorway, his face a mask of controlled fury, a pink slip clutched in his hand. "Really?" he said, his voice deadly quiet. "You're gonna fire me because I can't pretend everything's normal?" James looked at the termination notice with confusion. "I didn't." He turned to Olivia, who was staring at her son with horror. "I wrote it up," Olivia said quietly. "I thought, if I removed myself from the situation, if Tom didn't have to work in the same place where his mother was having a relationship with his boss." "You decided to fire me to make your love life more convenient?" Tom's voice cracked with betrayal. You decided that my job, my ability to support my family was less important than your comfort? I thought I was helping. You thought you were managing the situation like you manage everything else in this family, Tom shot back. Making decisions for other people, rearranging everyone else's life to make yours easier. The accusation hit Olivia like a physical blow. She saw the truth in it, saw how her lifetime of orchestrating family harmony had become another form of control, another way of prioritizing her own needs, while convincing herself she was helping others. Tom, please, she said, rising from her chair. I was trying to minimize the damage you caused by having an affair with my boss? It's not an affair, James said sharply, stepping around his desk to stand beside Olivia. We're both single adults in a committed relationship. The only damage here is what your family is doing to destroy it. Tom laughed bitterly. My family? You're the one who seduced a vulnerable widow. You're the one who created this whole mess by getting involved with someone whose children work for you. I didn't seduce anyone, James replied, his voice carrying the edge of real anger now. Your mother is a grown woman who made her own choices about what she wanted from life. If you can't respect that, if you can't treat her like the intelligent, capable adult she is, then maybe you don't deserve to work here. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Tom's face went white with rage. Are you threatening my job because I won't pretend to be happy about you screwing my mother? Tom! Olivia's voice cracked like a whip, finally reaching the end of her patience with her son's crude characterizations of her relationship. That's enough. You will not speak about me or about James with such disrespect. Disrespect? Tom's voice rose to match hers. What about the disrespect you've shown this family? What about the disrespect you've shown Dad's memory? What about the disrespect you've shown every value you raised us to believe in? The room fell silent, except for the sound of ragged breathing and the distant hum of construction equipment from the yard outside. Three people who had cared about each other, who had built something that resembled trust and respect, now faced each other across a divide that seemed impossible to bridge. Maria appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices, her face creased with concern. Is everything okay? Should I? Everything's fine, Olivia said automatically, the response of a lifetime spent maintaining appearances even when everything was falling apart. We're just having a discussion. But nothing was fine. The professional relationships that had sustained Mitchell Construction's family-like atmosphere were dissolving in real time. The careful boundaries between personal and professional life had been obliterated, leaving everyone involved to navigate a landscape of competing loyalties and irreconcilable differences. Tom crumpled the termination notice and threw it toward the trash can, missing by several feet. Keep your job, he said to James. Keep your relationship with my mother, but don't expect me to pretend I'm okay with any of it. He turned to leave, then paused at the door to deliver one final blow. And don't expect the rest of the crew to be okay with it either. Word's already getting around about what's really going on here. About how the boss's girlfriend gets special treatment. About how family connections matter more than professional competence. You think Morrison was the only client who's going to have problems with that? The threat was clear, and they all knew it wasn't empty. In a town the size of Traverse City, reputation was everything, and theirs was being systematically destroyed by people who claimed to love them. After Tom left, James and Olivia stood in the wreckage of what had been a productive, harmonious workplace. Both of them struggling to understand how love could create so much destruction. Maybe I should quit, Olivia said quietly. Maybe if I'm not working here, if there's no workplace relationship to object to. And go where? James asked gently. Take what job? At your age? In this town, after your daughter has been spreading rumors about your professional conduct? The brutal reality of the situation settled around them like a suffocating weight. Olivia was trapped, too old to easily find new employment, too visible in the community to escape the gossip, too proud to run away from the consequences of her choices. And James was trapped too, caught between his love for her and his responsibility to the employees who depended on him, between his desire to fight for their relationship and his need to preserve the business that was his life's work. What do we do? Olivia asked, her voice small and lost in a way that broke his heart. James pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the reality of their situation crashed over them both. Outside, the November wind howled around the building, carrying with it the promise of a harsh winter ahead. Inside, two people who had found unexpected love in the second act of their lives faced the terrible possibility that love might not be enough to overcome the forces arrayed against them. "We survive," James said into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "We hold on to each other and we survive whatever comes next." But even as he spoke the words, both of them wondered if survival was possible when the cost of their love was measured in ruined relationships, destroyed reputations, and the slow erosion of everything they had worked to build. The battle for their right to love each other was just beginning, and the casualties were already mounting on all sides. The weight of isolation pressed down on Olivia like a physical thing as she sat in her empty house on Friday evening. The silence broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock, and the distant sound of wind off the bay. For the first time since this all began, she felt truly alone. Cut off from her children, watching James's business suffer because of their relationship, wondering if her pursuit of happiness had been nothing more than selfish destruction dressed up as courage. She had tried calling Sarah twice, only to have her calls go straight to voicemail. Danny had sent a brief text, "Need time to think, Mom, love you," but nothing more. Tom was avoiding her completely, arriving at work after she did, and leaving before she could corner him for conversation. The family she had spent her life nurturing was fragmenting, and she was the fault line causing the earthquake. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Haven't heard from you in days? Coffee tomorrow morning? Bayview Cafe, 9 a.m. No arguments. Olivia stared at the message, realizing she had been so consumed with managing the crisis that she had forgotten she wasn't entirely alone. Patricia Anderson had been her friend for over 30 years, had walked beside her through every major milestone of her adult life. If anyone could help her make sense of this mess, it would be Pat. The Bayview Cafe sat perched on a bluff overlooking Grand Traverse Bay, its windows offering a panoramic view of water that stretched to the horizon. On this gray November morning, the waves were choppy and white-capped, matching Olivia's internal turbulence. She arrived early, choosing a corner table where they could speak privately, and waited with the nervous energy of someone about to make a confession. Patricia swept in precisely at 9, her silver hair wild from the wind, her cheeks pink with cold and indignation. At 64, she moved with the purposeful energy of someone who had never learned to slow down, her eyes bright with the intelligence that had made her one of the most respected nurses in the county before her retirement. "Olivia Marie Williams," she said without preamble, sliding into the opposite chair. "What in the hell is going on? I've been hearing the most ridiculous rumors about you and James Mitchell, and I figured I'd better get the truth straight from the source before I start defending your honor to the gossips at the grocery store." Despite everything, Olivia felt a smile tug at her lips. Trust Pat to cut straight to the heart of things with characteristic directness. "What have you heard?" "That you're having a torrid affair with your boss, that you've lost your mind, that you're having some kind of breakdown brought on by grief and loneliness." Pat's voice softened. "That your children are so ashamed they're not speaking to you." The last part hit like a physical blow, and Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes despite her efforts to maintain composure. The children part is true. The rest, it's more complicated than that. "Tell me." Pat's voice carried the gentle authority of someone who had spent decades listening to people's deepest fears and most shameful secrets. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." So Olivia did. She told Pat about the slow development of her friendship with James, about the coffee meetings that had become something more, about the first kiss by the bay, and the realization that she was capable of feeling passion she'd never experienced in her marriage. She described the careful secrecy, the growing intimacy, the moment when she'd realized she was in love with a man who saw her as more than just a mother and widow. "He makes me feel beautiful," she said quietly, staring out at the gray water. "Not despite my age, but because of everything I've lived through to get here. He listens to me talk about books and dreams, and all the things I thought I'd never share with anyone. He makes me feel like Olivia Williams, not just someone's wife or mother." Pat listened without interruption, her face thoughtful as she absorbed the details of her friend's transformation. When Olivia finished, describing the devastating family meeting and the professional complications that were threatening to destroy James's business, Pat was quiet for a long moment. "You know," she said finally, "when Harold died, my children had very strong opinions about how I should grieve. How long I should wear black, how often I should visit his grave, when it would be appropriate to start dating again, if ever." Olivia looked up, surprised. Pat rarely talked about her late husband or the aftermath of his death. They had this image of me as the grieving widow, forever devoted to their father's memory, content to live out my days tending his garden and preserving his legacy. Pat's voice carried a note of bitter amusement. "They were horrified when I started dating Robert, 67 years old, and they treated me like a teenager sneaking out after curfew. I didn't know it was that difficult for you. Because I didn't tell you. I was too embarrassed, too ashamed that my own children thought I was behaving inappropriately." Pat leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I let them make me feel guilty for wanting companionship, for wanting someone to hold me at night and laugh at my jokes and make me feel like a woman instead of just a memorial to their father." Olivia felt a chill of recognition. "What happened?" "I broke it off with Robert. Told him my family needed time to adjust, that maybe we should wait a year or two before making our relationship public." Pat's voice grew bitter. "You know what happened to those 1 or 2 years? They turned into forever. Robert found someone else, someone whose children celebrated her happiness instead of mourning her departure from widowhood. And I spent the next 3 years alone, convinced I'd done the right thing by putting my children's comfort ahead of my own happiness." The story hit Olivia like a cautionary tale, a glimpse into a possible future where sacrifice led not to family harmony but to permanent regret. "Do you wish you'd made different choices?" "Every damn day." Pat's voice was fierce with conviction. "Every day I wish I'd been brave enough to tell my children that their approval was not a prerequisite for my happiness. Every day I wish I'd chosen love over fear, joy over obligation." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. Olivia felt something shifting inside her chest, a hardening of resolve that had been wavering under the pressure of family disapproval. "But it's not just about me," she said finally. "James is losing clients because of our relationship. Tom's job is in jeopardy. The whole family is falling apart. How can I prioritize my happiness when it's causing so much pain to people I love?" Pat reached across the table and took Olivia's hands in her own, her grip firm and warm. "Honey, you're not causing this pain, you're revealing it. All those expectations your children have about who you should be, all those assumptions about what you owe them, that's not your burden to carry. That's their work to do. But the practical consequences are real, and they're difficult, but they're not your fault." Pat's voice was gentle but unyielding. "You didn't force James to fall in love with you. You didn't force your children to react with judgment and hostility. You didn't force this community to gossip and whisper about 2 adults finding happiness together. You just had the audacity to choose yourself for once in your life." The words resonated in places Olivia had kept carefully protected, challenging beliefs she'd held about duty and sacrifice, and the price of putting others first. But even as she felt the truth of Pat's words, the weight of consequences pressed down on her. What if James decides I'm not worth the trouble? What if he realizes that loving me is going to cost him everything he's worked for? "Then he's not the man you think he is," Pat said simply. "And if he is the man you think he is, then he's already considered those costs and decided you're worth them." Before Olivia could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Having lunch with Pastor Bob today. He asked if you'd like to join us. Says he has some thoughts he'd like to share with both of us." Olivia showed the message to Pat, who smiled knowingly. "Bob Thompson's a good man. If anyone can help you put this in perspective, it's him." An hour later, Olivia found herself sitting across from Pastor Bob Thompson in the quiet corner booth of Miller's Diner, James beside her, their hands clasped together on the table in a gesture of unity that felt both natural and defiant. Bob was younger than both of them, maybe 45, with the kind of calm presence that had made him beloved in the community, despite his progressive views on social issues. "I've been hearing things," Bob said without preamble, his voice carrying concern rather than judgment. "Disturbing things about how this community is treating two people I respect and care about." James squeezed Olivia's hand. "We appreciate your concern, Bob, but we knew there would be challenges. We're prepared to face them." "Are you?" Bob's eyes were serious, because what I'm hearing suggests that the challenges aren't just coming from outside the relationship. They're coming from within your own families, your own professional circles. That's a different kind of difficulty entirely. Olivia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm sure you've heard about the family meeting. About the things that were said. I've heard some of it. And I've been thinking about how to respond, both as your pastor and as someone who spent 15 years watching this community struggle with change." Bob paused, gathering his thoughts. "You know, I officiated at your husband's funeral, Olivia. I watched you grieve with such dignity, such grace, but I also watched you disappear a little more each day, watched you fold into yourself until you were barely visible. The observation was gentle but accurate, and Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. When you started working at Mitchell Construction, when you began to come alive again, I thought it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever witnessed. A woman rediscovering herself, reclaiming her identity, finding purpose beyond grief." Bob's voice grew stronger. "When I realized you two had found something special together, I was genuinely happy for you both." "And now?" James asked. "Now I'm angry," Bob said simply. "I'm angry at a community that claims to value love and family, but punishes people for pursuing happiness. I'm angry at children who think they have the right to dictate their parents' choices. I'm angry at the hypocrisy that allows men to remarry at any age without comment, but treats women as if they expire at 60. The words carried a moral authority that Olivia hadn't expected, a validation of her choices that she desperately needed to hear. "But anger doesn't solve your practical problems," Bob continued. "It doesn't restore family relationships or save business contracts. So let me ask you both something. What do you need from me? What do you need from your faith community? What do you need to get through this?" Olivia looked at James, then back at Bob, feeling something shift in her chest. "I need to know that choosing love isn't selfish. I need to know that wanting happiness at 62 doesn't make me a bad mother or a disgrace to my husband's memory. And I need to know that protecting the woman I love doesn't make me a fool." James added, "That fighting for our relationship is worth the cost, whatever that cost might be." Bob was quiet for a moment, his eyes moving between them with the assessing gaze of someone who had counseled countless couples through difficult times. "In my experience," he said finally, "love is always worth fighting for. But the fight has to be honest, with yourselves, with each other, and with the people trying to tear you apart." "What does that mean?" Olivia asked. "It means acknowledging that your children's fears aren't entirely unreasonable, even if their methods are wrong. It means recognizing that James's business concerns are valid, even if they shouldn't determine your relationship. It means being honest about what you're willing to sacrifice and what you're not, and making sure you're both on the same page about those boundaries." The conversation continued for another hour, touching on everything from biblical perspectives on love and remarriage to practical strategies for dealing with family conflict. Bob offered to mediate conversations with Olivia's children, to speak with business leaders in the community who might be influenced by gossip, to provide whatever support they needed to weather the storm. As they prepared to leave, Bob placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "I want you to remember something," he said. "Love is not a finite resource. Your love for each other doesn't diminish your love for your children or your memory of your late spouse. It doesn't make you less worthy of respect or less valuable as members of this community. It makes you human and blessed and deserving of celebration." Walking back to their cars, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Not the naive optimism that everything would work out perfectly, but the deeper hope that came from knowing she wasn't alone, that her choices were valid, that the love she'd found was worth defending. "How are you feeling?" James asked, stopping beside her car. "Stronger," she said honestly. "Still scared. Still worried about what comes next, but stronger." James pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the November wind whipped around them. "We're going to get through this," he murmured against her hair. "Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, We're gonna get through this together. As Olivia drove home, she thought about Pat's story of lost love and permanent regret, about Bob's validation of their choices, about the strength she'd found in community support when family support had been withdrawn. The road ahead was still uncertain, still fraught with difficult decisions and painful consequences. But for the first time since Tom had discovered their secret, she felt ready to face whatever came next. She was 62 years old, in love with a good man, and supported by friends who valued her happiness over their own comfort. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to keep fighting for the life she wanted to build with James, whatever the cost might be. The battle for their love was far from over. But Olivia Williams was no longer fighting it alone. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in early December, while Olivia was curled up on James's couch watching the snow fall outside his lakefront windows. They had been spending more time at his house lately, partly because it felt like neutral ground away from the memories that haunted her family home, and partly because the gossip mill had already done its worst. There seemed little point in maintaining the pretense of separate lives when the whole town knew they were together. Sarah's voice on the other end of the line was crisp and businesslike, the tone she used for hostile takeovers and contract negotiations. "Mom, we need to talk. Tom, Danny, Michael and I have been discussing the situation, and we've reached some decisions." Olivia felt James's hand find hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of support. He could hear the coldness in Sarah's voice even from across the room, could see the way Olivia's face had gone pale at whatever her daughter was saying. "What kind of decisions?" Olivia asked, though she dreaded the answer. "We're having a family meeting, Sunday afternoon at my house. 1 o'clock. And Mom, this time, it's not a discussion. It's a decision point." The words carried a finality that made Olivia's stomach clench with foreboding. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that this has gone on long enough. I'm talking about the fact that your relationship with James Mitchell is destroying our family and embarrassing us in the community. I'm talking about the fact that you need to make a choice." There it was, the ultimatum Olivia had been dreading since the first family meeting. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it settle around her like a shroud. "What choice? End the relationship, or end your relationship with us?" Sarah's voice was steady, implacable. "It's that simple, Mom. Him or us. Your family or your... whatever this is." The brutality of it took Olivia's breath away. "Sarah, you can't be serious. You can't ask me to choose between the man I love and my children." "We're not asking, Mom. We're telling. This situation has become untenable. Tom can barely function at work. His marriage is suffering because he's so stressed about the whole thing. Danny's having anxiety attacks about the family falling apart. My reputation in the business community is being damaged because people are questioning my judgment based on your behavior." Each accusation hit like a physical blow, but Olivia forced herself to respond. "My behavior? Sarah, I'm not behaving badly. I'm in love with a good man who treats me with respect and kindness. Since when is that shameful? Since you started sneaking around with your boss like some desperate woman half your age." Sarah snapped, her careful composure finally cracking. "Since you started prioritizing your own desires over your family's well-being. Since you decided that what you want matters more than what your children need." James squeezed Olivia's hand tighter, his own anger evident in the set of his jaw. But he remained silent, understanding that this was something Olivia had to navigate on her own. "What you need," Olivia repeated slowly, "is for me to be alone for the rest of my life, so you can feel comfortable with your image of who I should be. What you need is for me to sacrifice my happiness to preserve your sense of family order. What we need is for our mother to act like our mother instead of like some teenager with a crush." Sarah's voice was rising now, emotion bleeding through the professional facade. "What we need is for you to remember that you have responsibilities, that your choices affect other people, that you can't just do whatever you want without consequences." "I never said there wouldn't be consequences," Olivia replied, her own voice growing strong. "But the consequences should be mine to bear, not something you threaten me with to control my behavior." "Control your behavior?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "Mom, someone needs to control your behavior, because you're clearly not capable of making rational decisions about your own life." The condescension in her daughter's voice sparked something fierce in Olivia's chest. "I'm not capable? Sarah, I'm 62 years old. I've raised 3 children, buried a husband, run a business, and started over from scratch after losing everything familiar. I think I've proven my capability of making decisions about my own life. Then why are you making such a spectacularly bad one?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Olivia felt the moment crystallizing around her. This was it, the point where she either surrendered to her children's vision of who she should be, or claimed her right to determine her own future. "Because it doesn't feel bad to me," she said quietly. "Because for the first time in years, I wake up excited about the day ahead. Because James makes me laugh and challenges me intellectually and makes me feel beautiful and desired and alive. Because I'd rather have 6 months of real happiness than 6 years of empty contentment." "And what about your grandchildren?" Sarah's voice turned sharp, wielding the ultimate weapon. "What about Emma and Jake? Do you want them to grow up thinking their grandmother chose some man over her own family? Do you want them to be ashamed to tell their friends about you?" The threat about the grandchildren hit its mark, and James could see Olivia recoil as if she'd been struck. This was Sarah's nuclear option. The possibility of being cut off from Emma and Jake, the 8- and 6-year-old lights of Olivia's life. "You wouldn't," Olivia whispered. "I would," Sarah said simply. "I won't have my children exposed to this dysfunction. I won't have them thinking that marriage vows and family loyalty are meaningless, that people can just abandon their responsibilities when they find something more entertaining. Sarah, please. Sunday at 1 o'clock, Mom. Come alone, and come prepared to make a choice. End this relationship, or end your relationship with your family. Those are your options." The line went dead, leaving Olivia staring at her phone with a mixture of shock and grief. She had known this moment might come, had feared it, but the reality of it was somehow worse than anything she had imagined. James pulled her into his arms, holding her as she began to shake with the force of suppressed tears. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I'm so sorry they're putting you through this." "She means it," Olivia said, her voice muffled against his chest. "She'll really cut me off from the grandchildren. She'll turn the whole family against me. Maybe. Or maybe she's bluffing, hoping the threat will be enough to make you back down." Olivia pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And if she's not bluffing? If I have to choose between you and them?" James was quiet for a long moment, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "Then you choose what you can live with," he said finally. "What you can wake up with every morning for the rest of your life. And if I choose them? If I decide I can't lose my children and grandchildren?" The question cut through James like a blade, but he forced himself to answer honestly. "Then I'll understand. I'll hate it, and I'll probably never get over it, but I'll understand. You'd let me go? If that's what you needed to do for your peace of mind, yes. Because I love you enough to want you to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me." The generosity of his response broke something open in Olivia's chest. Here was a man willing to sacrifice his own happiness for hers, willing to let her go if that's what she needed, even knowing it would destroy him. The contrast with her children's manipulative ultimatum was stark and painful. They spent the rest of the evening talking through the impossible choice Sarah had presented, exploring options and consequences, trying to find some path forward that wouldn't require choosing between love and family. But as the night wore on, it became clear that Sarah had constructed the ultimatum too carefully, had made the stakes too high and the timeline too short for any kind of compromise. "What are you going to do?" James asked as they prepared for bed, his voice carefully neutral despite the obvious strain. "I don't know," Olivia admitted. "I need to think. I need to figure out what I can live with." But even as she said the words, something was hardening in her chest, a resolve that had been building through weeks of manipulation and emotional blackmail. She thought about Pat's story of choosing family approval over love and regretting it for the rest of her life. She thought about Pastor Bob's words about the courage required to claim happiness. She thought about the woman she had been before James, invisible, forgotten, existing only in relation to other people's needs. By Thursday morning, something had shifted. Olivia woke up in James's arms, feeling not devastated by her children's ultimatum, but angry. furiously, righteously angry at being treated like a child whose choices required approval, at being threatened with emotional abandonment for the crime of falling in love. "I'm not going," she announced over coffee, her voice steady with conviction. James looked up from his newspaper, surprised by the firmness in her tone. To the family meeting? To their ambush? To their staged intervention designed to shame me into compliance? Olivia's eyes were bright with determination. "I'm not going to sit there and let them tell me what my life should look like. I'm not going to justify my happiness to people who should be celebrating it." "Olivia, are you sure? If you don't go, if you don't give them a chance to what? To bully me into giving you up? To convince me that loving you is selfish and wrong and inappropriate for a woman my age?" Olivia shook her head. "James, I've spent my entire adult life seeking approval from people who only gave it when I made myself smaller, when I prioritized their comfort over my own needs. I'm done with that." James reached across the table to take her hand. "What does that mean?" "It means I choose you, I choose us. I choose the life we're building together over the life they think I should be content with." Olivia's voice grew stronger with each word. "I choose happiness over approval, love over obligation, my own authentic self over their image of who I should be. Even if it means losing them?" The question cut deep, but Olivia didn't flinch from it. "Even then, because if they're willing to abandon me for choosing love, then they were never really mine to lose." That evening, instead of preparing for Sunday's confrontation, Olivia sat down at her computer and wrote a letter to her children. She printed it out, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope addressed to Sarah. On Sunday afternoon, while her children waited for her to appear and submit to their ultimatum, a courier delivered the letter to Sarah's door. "My dear children, I received your ultimatum, and I want you to know that I understand the position you think you're putting me in. You believe that by forcing me to choose between James and our family, you can make me prioritize your comfort over my happiness. You believe that the threat of losing you will be enough to make me surrender the love I've found. You're wrong. I choose James. I choose the relationship that makes me feel valued and cherished and alive. I choose the man who sees me as more than just your mother or your father's widow. I choose love over fear, happiness over obligation, my authentic self over your expectations. This doesn't mean I love you any less. It means I finally love myself enough to refuse your attempts to control my life. It means I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my well-being for your comfort. If you decide that my choice makes me unworthy of your love, then that's a choice you'll have to live with. But I won't live with the regret of giving up the best thing that's happened to me in years, just to preserve your illusion of who I should be. I hope someday you'll understand that my happiness doesn't diminish my love for you. I hope you'll realize that a mother who models courage and authenticity is a better role model than one who sacrifices herself to maintain family harmony. Until then, I'll be here when you're ready to accept me as I am, not as you think I should be. All my love, Mom." After the letter was sent, Olivia and James drove to the church where Pastor Bob was waiting to perform a simple ceremony. With Pat as her maid of honor, and the pastor's wife as witness, Olivia Williams became Olivia Mitchell, in a quiet exchange of vows that promised love, honor, and the courage to choose each other against all odds. As they walked out of the church into the December afternoon, hand in hand and married, Olivia felt something she had never experienced before, the fierce joy of a woman who had finally chosen herself. The road ahead would be difficult, the consequences painful, but for the first time in her life, she was walking it as completely, authentically herself. The ultimatum had been meant to break her. Instead, it had set her free. The snow fell in thick, lazy flakes as Olivia and James stood on the steps of the small chapel, their hands intertwined, their breath visible in the crisp December air. The ceremony had been simple. No elaborate flowers, no crowd of well-wishers, no traditional wedding fanfare. Just two people in their 60s, surrounded by the few friends brave enough to support their love, speaking vows that felt more meaningful than any grand celebration could have been. "Mrs. Mitchell," James said softly, his eyes bright with wonder as he looked at his new wife, "how does it feel?" Olivia considered the question, testing the weight of her new name, the reality of what they had just done. "It feels like coming home to myself," she said finally. "Like I've been holding my breath for years and can finally exhale." Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her own joy mixing with fierce protectiveness. "You two are going to be just fine," she declared, pulling them both into a hug that smelled of her familiar perfume and the strength of unconditional friendship. "And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to be part of your story." Pastor Bob shook James's hand and kissed Olivia's cheek, his blessing carrying the weight of both spiritual authority and personal affection. "Love like yours is rare," he said quietly. "Hold on to it, fight for it, and don't let anyone convince you it's anything less than a gift from God." As they prepared to leave, a figure emerged from the shadows near the church parking lot. Danny stood there, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, his face a mixture of uncertainty and determination that reminded Olivia painfully of the little boy he'd once been. "Danny," she breathed, her heart clenching with hope and fear in equal measure. He approached slowly, his eyes moving between his mother and James with an expression of careful assessment. "I couldn't stay away," he said quietly. "Sarah doesn't know I'm here, Tom doesn't know. But I couldn't let you get married without at least one of your children being present." Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes. "You came." "I came because I love you," Danny said simply. "Because I've been thinking about everything that's happened, everything that's been said, and I realized that I've been letting fear make decisions for me. Fear of change, fear of seeing you as someone other than just my mother, fear of what it means for our family." James squeezed Olivia's hand, understanding the magnitude of what was happening. One of her children was choosing to bridge the divide, to prioritize love over judgment. "I don't understand everything about your relationship," Danny continued, his voice growing stronger. "I don't know how to reconcile the mother who raised me with the woman who's standing here in a wedding dress, choosing herself over family harmony. But I know that the happiest I've seen you in years is when you're with James. I know that you light up when you talk about him, that you seem more yourself than you've been since Dad died." "Danny," Olivia started, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. I know that Sarah and Tom think they're protecting you, protecting the family, protecting Dad's memory, but I think they're actually protecting themselves from having to see you as a complete person instead of just their mother, from having to accept that their comfortable image of family is changing." The psychological insight was quintessentially Danny, but it carried an emotional weight that spoke to his personal growth and courage. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something more intimate. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for not standing up to them sooner, for letting them make you feel like you had to choose between love and family. I'm sorry for being so focused on keeping everyone happy that I forgot to ask if you were happy." Olivia closed the distance between them, pulling her youngest son into a fierce embrace. "Thank you," she whispered against his ear. "Thank you for being here, for seeing me, for choosing to understand instead of condemn." "I love you, Mom." "Both of you," Danny said, including James in his gaze. "And I want you to know that whatever happens with Sarah and Tom, you'll always have me. My support, my love, my respect for the choices you're making." James stepped forward, extending his hand to Danny with the gravity of a man accepting a son. "Thank you," he said simply, "for supporting her, for being here, for giving us the gift of family witness to our commitment." Danny shook James's hand, then surprised him by pulling him into a brief but genuine hug. "Take care of her," he said quietly. "She's the strongest woman I know, but she's also been taking care of everyone else for so long that she sometimes forgets to take care of herself." "I will," James promised, his voice thick with emotion. As they left the church, Olivia felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in weeks. One son had chosen love over fear, understanding over judgment. It wasn't everything. Sarah and Tom's absence ached like a physical wound, but it was something. It was hope. They drove to James's house, their house now, where Patricia had prepared a simple celebration dinner. The small group gathered around the dining room table, sharing stories and laughter, creating new memories to mark the beginning of their married life. As the evening progressed, Olivia found herself studying the faces around the table. James with his quiet contentment, Patricia with her fierce loyalty, Danny with his thoughtful support, Pastor Bob and his wife with their generous blessing. I spent so many years believing that family meant the people who shared your blood, Olivia said during a quiet moment, her wine glass half empty, her heart full. But sitting here tonight, I realize that family is actually the people who choose to love and support you as you are, not as they think you should be. Chosen family? Danny agreed, raising his glass. To chosen family, and to the courage to choose love. They drank to that, to love and courage, and the beautiful complexity of human connection. Later, after the guests had gone home and the dishes were cleared, Olivia and James stood in their bedroom, their shared bedroom now, helping each other out of their wedding clothes with the careful tenderness of people still discovering each other. Any regrets? James asked as they prepared for bed, his voice carrying just a hint of uncertainty. Olivia considered the question seriously. The day had been perfect in its own way, but it had also been marked by the glaring absence of two of her children, by the knowledge that their marriage had cost them relationships they both treasured. The practical challenges remained: the damaged business reputation, the ongoing gossip, the uncertain future of their professional lives. No regrets about marrying you, she said finally. Regrets about the pain it's caused, sadness about the relationships that have been damaged, worry about what comes next. But no regrets about choosing you, choosing us, choosing this life we're building together. James pulled her into his arms, holding her close as they stood in the lamplight of their bedroom. I love you, Mrs. Mitchell. More than I thought possible, more than I knew I was still capable of feeling. I love you too, she replied, marveling at how natural the words felt, how right it seemed to be standing here with this man who had become her partner, her confidant, her chosen future. And I'm not sorry for fighting for that love, whatever it cost. Their wedding night was quiet and intimate, a celebration of connection rather than passion, though that was present too. They made love with the careful attention of people who had thought such joy was behind them, who had discovered that desire and tenderness could coexist beautifully in mature hearts. Afterward, as they lay entwined in their bed, Olivia felt a profound sense of completion. Not because she had found a man to complete her, she had learned that she was complete on her own, but because she had found someone who enhanced her completeness, who saw and celebrated all the parts of herself she had kept hidden for so long. The week that followed their wedding was a mixture of honeymoon bliss and harsh reality. They spent mornings lingering over coffee and newspapers, afternoons walking along the snow-covered beach, evenings cooking together and learning the rhythms of shared domestic life. But they also faced the ongoing challenges of their situation, the whispered conversations that stopped when they entered local businesses, the careful distance maintained by some of James's business associates, the painful silence from Sarah and Tom. Mitchell Construction lost another contract, James told her one evening as they prepared dinner together. The Harbor View project. They cited scheduling conflicts, but the real reason is pretty obvious. Olivia felt the familiar pang of guilt, the whisper that her happiness was costing him everything he'd worked for. Maybe I should. No, James interrupted firmly, turning from the stove to face her. Whatever you're about to suggest, quitting your job, moving away, changing your name back, no, we're not going to let fear make our decisions for us. But if the business fails, then we'll figure something else out. Together. He moved to stand in front of her, his hands settling on her shoulders. Olivia, I built that business once from nothing. I can build it again if I have to. But I can't build another you, another us. Some things are worth more than money or reputation, or the approval of people who don't really know us. His words reminded her of the conversation they'd had with Pastor Bob, about the courage required to choose love over fear, authenticity over approval. It was a lesson she was still learning, still fighting to internalize despite a lifetime of conditioning to the contrary. Besides, James continued with a small smile, we're not without allies. Pat's been telling everyone at the grocery store that we're the most romantic couple she's ever seen. Pastor Bob mentioned our inspiring love story in his sermon last Sunday. And Danny's been having conversations with some of his graduate school friends about ageism and the right to happiness at any stage of life. The thought of Danny defending their relationship to his academic peers warmed Olivia's heart. Her youngest son had always been thoughtful and principled, but his willingness to stand up for their choices, to educate others about the prejudices they were facing, showed a maturity and courage that made her proud. "What about Sarah and Tom?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. James's expression grew more serious. "Danny says Sarah's been having some problems with Michael. Apparently, he's been pushing back against her characterization of our relationship, suggesting that her need to control the situation says more about her than about us." "And Tom?" "Still angry, still struggling at work. But Danny thinks he's starting to have some doubts about the position he's taken. His wife has been asking questions about whether his reaction is really about protecting you or about his own discomfort with change." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. The first cracks in the united front her older children had presented. Olivia allowed herself a small flicker of hope that time and reflection might eventually heal the wounds that had been opened. As Christmas approached, the absence of her children became more acute. This would be the first holiday season without the traditional family gathering, the first time she wouldn't be cooking for the extended family, orchestrating the complex dance of personalities and expectations that had defined their celebrations for decades. "We could go away," James suggested one evening as they looked through travel brochures. "Take that trip to Ireland I mentioned. Start some new traditions." The idea was tempting. Escape from the familiar rhythms of family holidays, from the painful reminders of relationships that had been severed. But something in Olivia rebelled against the idea of running away, of letting her children's absence drive her from the life she was building. "No," she said finally. "This is our home now. These are our traditions to make. We don't hide from the choices we've made." So they created their own Christmas celebration. Intimate dinners with Patricia, quiet walks through the snow-covered town, evenings by the fireplace sharing stories of Christmases past and dreams for the future. It was different from what Olivia had known, smaller and quieter, but it was theirs. On Christmas Eve, as they sat by their tree, a modest Fraser fir decorated with ornaments that represented their combined histories, Olivia felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the easy path, not for the untroubled happiness she had once imagined, but for the complex, challenging, deeply authentic life she had chosen. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Tom hadn't caught us that morning?" she asked James as they watched the snow fall outside their window. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I think we would have been discovered eventually. Love like ours is hard to hide, hard to contain. It wants to be celebrated, acknowledged, shared with the world. Even when the world doesn't want to celebrate it. Especially then," James said, pulling her closer, "because the world needs to see that love doesn't have an expiration date, that happiness isn't reserved for the young, that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary." As they prepared for bed on their first Christmas Eve as husband and wife, Olivia felt the truth of his words settling into her bones. They had chosen each other despite the obstacles, despite the cost. Despite the pain it had caused people they loved, they had chosen authenticity over approval, love over fear, their own happiness over other people's comfort. It hadn't been easy, and it wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more consequences to face, more relationships to navigate. But they would face them together, as partners, as equals, as two people who had found something precious and were determined to protect it. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of possibility, and for the first time in her life, Olivia Williams Mitchell was walking into that future, as completely, authentically, unapologetically herself. The call came at 6 a.m. on a humid July day, jolting Olivia from sleep with the shrill urgency that every parent learns to fear. Danny's voice was tight with panic as he spoke words that turned her blood cold. "Mom, you need to get to the hospital. You had a heart episode during your morning walk. James found you collapsed on the beach." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical terminology and worried faces. Olivia drifted in and out of consciousness in the hospital bed, dimly aware of James holding her hand, of doctors discussing her condition in hushed tones. But what struck her most was the gradual gathering of voices in the hallway outside her room. voices she hadn't heard in 8 months. Sarah arrived first, her heels clicking frantically down the hospital corridor, her carefully composed facade cracking the moment she saw her mother hooked up to monitors and IV lines. She stood frozen in the doorway, taking in the sight of James sitting beside the bed, his face haggard with worry, his hand protectively covering Olivia's. "How is she?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Stable," James replied without looking up. "The doctors say it was stress-related, not a major heart attack. But she needs rest, and she needs—" He finally raised his eyes to meet Sarah's. "She needs her family." Tom arrived an hour later with his wife, his face pale with the kind of fear that strips away pretense and leaves only raw emotion. He stopped short when he saw James, 8 months of workplace tension and family conflict flickering across his features before being overwhelmed by concern for his mother. For the next 3 days, they maintained an awkward vigil. Sarah, Tom, and Danny taking shifts, James never leaving Olivia's side, the family orbiting around her hospital bed like planets around a wounded sun. Conversations were stilted, careful, focused entirely on medical updates and practical concerns. But something was shifting in the spaces between words. It was Michael who finally broke the careful silence. On the 3rd evening, as Olivia slept peacefully for the first time since her collapse, he pulled Sarah aside in the hospital cafeteria. "This has to stop," he said quietly. "Look at him. James hasn't left her side for 3 days. He's been holding her hand, talking to her doctors, making sure she's comfortable. This isn't the behavior of a man using your mother. This is love, Sarah. Real, devoted, protective love." Sarah's carefully constructed wall of anger finally crumbled. "I was so scared," she whispered. "When Danny called, when I thought I might lose her without ever telling her I was sorry, I realized that none of it mattered. Not the gossip, not the workplace complications, not my stupid pride. I just wanted my mother back." The healing began slowly, tentatively. Tom approached James in the hospital corridor, extending his hand in a gesture that carried 8 months of unspoken apology. "Take care of her," he said simply. "She's happy with you, and that's what matters." When Olivia finally came home, she found her house filled with flowers from her children, her refrigerator stocked by Sarah, her garden tended by Tom. The family gathered for Sunday dinner, not the same as before, but something new and perhaps stronger. They had learned that love, in all its forms, was too precious to sacrifice to pride or fear. As Olivia looked around the table at her family, James beside her, her children slowly learning to accept their new reality, she realized that sometimes the greatest gift was not avoiding fractures, but learning how to heal them with grace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote.